This explosion was one of the only ones that woke me up out of a dead sleep early in the morning, so violent that it shook the windows and it almost threw me out of my bed. All I could remember from that day are the children screaming. That's today's topic on the Combat Perspective. Thanks for joining me today on the Combat Perspective. Today I'm going to be talking about a day that is etched in my mind. It started out as a typical morning with me sleeping, I guess, but I was violently woken up from an explosion. Normally, you could tell how big the explosion was by how much the building shakes. It rattles, the windows getting blown out. And after many months in Iraq and so many car bombs, VBIEDs, and other type of explosions, you get used to how big they are or how devastating they're going to be. And this one was the biggest one that I experienced to date. So I was sleeping in the barracks. Our Bravo element in our platoon was out on mission in Ramadi, and at the end of the day, when both of our sections were together, they were telling us stories on how after the explosion happened, and they were probably a half mile away from it, they could see the shockwave coming towards them, and they were doing a dismounted patrol in Ramadi City, and they said that they saw the shockwave coming past the buildings and the impact when it hit them, how devastating it was just to be out in the streets and the ears ringing and the concussion, the blast in their chest. And that was roughly a half mile away. From the explosion where I was sleeping in the barracks, it was more than a mile, if not 2 miles away. And the building shook, the bed shook, the windows, some of the windows blew out, and it rattled me. And it didn't take long for us to know that, number one, something happened. Number two, that it wasn't just a normal IED that someone hit. This was definitely a target. Now, we weren't sure if it was a target on our base, or if it was against the police station or against the Iraqi army. Multiple places were in our vicinity. About 5 minutes to 10 minutes after that rattled us, there was the first call for a mass casualty, so MASCAL, mass casualty event, and anyone CLS or higher qualified medically needs to report to Charlie Med. So me and one other person from the platoon, we were the Black Hawk first responders, so a little bit more training than CLS certified soldiers. We ran to the aid station, and in the background you can still see the mushroom cloud and the dust in the air from where it occurred. And it was in an unusual spot. It was more towards the river, the Euphrates River. So we weren't necessarily sure what was happening, but we knew that there was a mass casualty event. And as soon as the vehicle started showing up, we realized it was an attack against the Iraqi populace. All of the injured coming in was families, male, female, children, no discrimination against age or anything else, but they were arriving in the Iraqi police trucks. They're unmistakable. They're just white pickup trucks with blue doors, with their logos on the side, and in Arabic it's written probably police. And by the time I got to my first truck, the first person that I assisted was an Iraqi police officer. At the time, he didn't look like he was injured too bad. He did have some singeing on his hair, so he was relatively close to the blast. Started pulling him out of the truck. He was grunting in pain. There was a lot of confusion and running around. Multiple trucks are showing up at a time. So I pulled him out of the truck and then had him stand next to the truck so I could keep unloading people. And I didn't realize that he had an open fracture in his leg. And so as soon as he got off the truck, his weight shifted on that bad leg, and he fell over, causing more injury to the bone sticking out. Got him on a stretcher, ran him in. He was a lower priority, so we put him into a holding area where lower priority casualties were going. So obviously we're looking for the people who are near death, that need medical intervention right away. Otherwise they're going to pass away. They're going to be the priority. Anybody who needs emergency surgeries. Our Charlie Med in Ramadi was a great medical facility that could do, I'd say, minor operations, but anything severe needed to be flown out, usually to Baghdad. And so after my pulling out, after getting that Iraqi police officer on a stretcher on a gurney to a low priority waiting list, I ran back to the truck, started assisting with the next person. This person was severely burnt, and he wasn't going to make it. He was pretty much on his last leg. So got him on a stretcher. The severity of his burns, just moving him, was pretty horrifying. Just the way the skin and the flesh reacts to any type of touching or movement, getting him onto a stretcher. So we get him towards the front of the line, but at this point, there really wasn't a chance he was going to survive, or even working on him was likely going to cause his death. So, and then the third person in the truck that we were assisting, it looked like he had sustained some injuries. His shirt was already cut off, and there was blood on his chest. And it looked like there were some deep lacerations inside of his chest. So once we got him to the beginning of the truck, I went to brace him, lift him up, and brace him in order to get him out of the truck. When I put my hand behind him, the injuries in his front were actually pretty much the injuries, less severe injuries that were on his back. So he had large pieces of shrapnel and probably rocks and other debris that pretty much blew through his body, and my hand pretty much went into his back. He was semi-stable, so I obviously did not follow up with these people, but I would assume he was able to survive the injury. As soon as we get the three people out of that truck, we're already getting more trucks in. The mass casualties ended up being close to 70 people. The more severe were coming the quickest. Usually the Iraqi police were also prioritizing who they wanted to be saved as well. But the thing that sticks with me is when the families started coming in, the mothers with the children. At the time, being 19, maybe I was 20 at this point, I didn't have children, and it didn't really affect me as much in the moment as it does now, which is very unusual that in the moment and the couple years afterwards didn't really affect me until I had my own kids, and then these memories come back, and it's pretty haunting to think that could have been, my child, or that, these small children are just stuck in the crossfire. It's pretty gut wrenching. And so on my second truck, luckily I wasn't assisting children, but on my second truck, that's when the family started arriving from personal cars, military escorts from the Iraqi army, also U.S. troops, and then also some Iraqi police vehicles were bringing them. And as I was loading someone else on a gurney and carrying them past the entrance of Charlie Med, I locked eyes on this mother that was holding two children. One little girl must have been about 1.5, maybe 2, which is difficult because my daughter is 2 years old right now. And the mother we locked eyes, and she just had that fear in her eyes. Obviously, she wasn't concerned about her health, even though she was bleeding from the ears, the nose, the mouth, and the head. She was trying to comfort her child. I didn't see the injury to the child, but knowing what her mother had going on, you could assume the child had, sustained some injuries from the shockwave as well, at least perforated eardrums. A lot of times explosions rattle your inside so much that it causes internal injuries. And so I just remember her screaming. And then she was also holding a boy that was probably about 5 or 6, and he was crying as well, but he was looking around. He was reacting to things around him, but he had a lot of blood on his face as well. And the cries of the children are haunting. There's a famous photo at the beginning of the war. It's of a medic. He's in his desert greens, desert camo, but he's wearing his mop gear, which is green, and he's sitting cross-legged in the desert, just holding on to this little baby. And you could tell the baby's in bad shape. You can't really see the baby, but you could see it looks like gauze or something that's wrapped around the baby, and there's blood on it. And he's just looking at the camera, that whoever took the photo. I believe that photo won many awards. Wasn't many years ago, but that medic actually committed suicide. But he had to have been a father. I don't see how people with kids don't react emotionally, and it's devastating to see what effects that evil can do to someone. There's a certain age where you stop feeling bad for decisions that people make. In Ramadi, we would have the insurgency would pay children $50 to throw a grenade and stuff like that, and the children did it. But there's a certain age for me that my best guess would be teenage years, maybe 10 plus, that the child should know enough right from wrong in order to make a decision that I shouldn't do this or I should do this. That could easily draw the line of friend and foe. But for the children that's just stuck in the crossfire, or that are getting injured or wounded from, honestly, it doesn't matter what side. It's devastating. The VBIED that went off was a dump truck, and it was targeting in an Iraqi police officer's house. He was the commanding officer for the Iraqi police precinct where we were, and it just destroyed the area. The crater was at least 15 feet deep, 40 if not 45 feet across. But the explosion just doesn't affect that certain area. It affects the town and the streets that are next to it. And these are where all these kids were playing outside, or the women were doing laundry or routine tasks around the house. But it's one of those things that haunt you. You try not to have certain triggers affect you as much, but I told my wife a while ago that it's hard for me to see my children in pain or not listening, because those moments take me back to just feeling totally helpless. Nothing else you could do. It's rough to think about small children being hurt, especially when they don't know the right and wrong. They don't have any input. They're just stuck in the wrong place at the wrong time, injured by acts of violence that just are unnecessary. Mass casualties were devastating in Ramadi. We had probably about 10 or 15 mass casualty events while we were in Ramadi. But everyone was difficult. But I tried to make up for it as much as I could. We started taking out a lot more toys to the kids. In another episode, I'll talk about rendering aid to a few children and what I was able to do there. But it changed me. Not in the moment. To be honest, this moment didn't change me at all until I was older. And it's one of those things that now reoccur, that I could still smell the smells. I could still see the dust cloud, but I could still hear the screams.